Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third of our series of 4 webinars jointly between the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management and the British Hydrological Society on climate science in water systems to inform decision-making on adaptation and resilience to climate change. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I'm just going to talk through a bit of housekeeping. So the webinar is being recorded and will be available in the next couple of weeks on CIWEM's YouTube channel, subject to us just getting permission from the speakers to publish themselves speaking, and there being no copyright issues. So 2 buttons you need to be aware of for different reasons. If you're having technical issues, please use the chat function, and Barbara Woods from CIWEM HQ is here and will help you with any technical challenges that you have. If you would like to ask a question, however, please use the Q&A function. So you can ask a question at any point. If you would like to sort of pose that to any particular speaker, because we'll do the Q&A at the end of the technical presentations, then please feel free to say that. We may go to other speakers as well to get different perspectives, depending on what the question is. And you can look at that and upvote questions as well as asking them anonymously if you want to. And an hour of CPD is attributable to this webinar. Okay, next slide, please. So I will introduce both of us today and some technical challenges for Duncan, unfortunately. So I'm Hannah Burgess. I am the president of the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management. And I would like to introduce Duncan Faulkner as well. Duncan is the president of the British Hydrological Society and the chief hydrologist at JBA Consulting. And we're jointly hosting this as a presidential series of webinars. And if we go to the next slide. And if you want to find out more about CIWEM or about the BHS, Barbara is posting some links in the chat, which are the links you can see on the slide here. Do go to our websites and find out more. And at the end of today's session, I'll just be going through some forthcoming events for the BHS and CIWEM that you might choose to attend. And next slide. And just to highlight where we are in our series of 3 webinars. So we're already on week 3. It's gone remarkably quickly. And today we'll be focusing on water resources and groundwater and the latest research on low flows and groundwater, considering drought and those impacts on groundwater levels. And this ties into CIWEM's presidential theme and what the British Hydrological Society are looking to achieve in terms of having this webinar series. It was important to us to talk about the latest scientific evidence to inform decision-making on resilience and adaptation actions. And we will all be well aware that we are in a time of climate and ecological crisis. And this evidence is really critical to inform the decisions that we make, not only for today, but also for the future. So I'm now going to hand over to our first speakers, which are Aiken Besley and Mark Whiteman from the Environment Agency. Whilst they share their screen, I'm going to introduce them a little bit more. So Aiken Besley is a senior advisor in the Environment Agency Security of Supply team, which is a national water resources policy team. Aiken has been working on water resources issues locally, regionally and nationally for almost 8 years. Specialising in water resources planning and policy, he is determined to drive better environmental practices and robust planning for a more sustainable future. He has developed extensive knowledge of water resources planning approaches and regulations at the Environment Agency, and he has recently led Environment Agency publications on water resources, including a summary of water resources plans and the analysis of the water industry's 2023 to 2024 water resources performance. That's Aiken. And his colleague Mark. So Mark Whiteman is a senior advisor in the Environment Agency's National Groundwater team in the Environment and Business Directorate. Mark is a hydrogeologist who has worked for over 30 years with the Environment Agency on groundwater resources management, and his interests include groundwater dependent wetlands, groundwater resources modelling, and applying nature-based solutions for groundwater and water resources benefits. Okay, so over to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks for the introduction, Hannah. Hope can everyone hear me? Just a quick affirmation. Great. So yeah, we're going to talk to you very briefly about what does the climate emergency mean for our water resources, bringing together the evidence we have at the Environment Agency. So there's some big questions. How much water do we have? How much does society need? What does the environment need? I think it's first important to acknowledge that we do actually face water scarcity across multiple parts of England, particularly in the east and southeast of England. And the latest set of plans in terms of public water supply, water sources management plans, really set out the scale of this challenge. And there's a summary on the government website, which I would recommend people checking out. Our National Framework for Water Resources, which we published back in 2020-2021, really highlights the scale of this challenge nationally, not just across public water supply, but also non-public water supplies. And we're working on an update of that national framework at the moment. So we have relatively good understanding on public water supply. However, non-public water supply is much more complex. And really the answers to these questions depend on kind of what level of resilience to drought we're actually seeking. So, for example, in an agricultural context, how often is an acceptable crop failure to drought? Is it 1 in 20 years? Is it 1 in 100 years? And also, there's definitely a kind of growing level of understanding around current and future water availability across other sectors. And it's really its infancy, and there's lots of initiatives going on now to improve that. And finally, we face quite a lot of uncertainty around future needs, particularly emerging new water demands associated with things like hydrogen production, data centers, carbon capture, and other key kind of renewable energy technologies. So the key thing here is the future is never certain. That being said, for public water supplies, we have quite a good idea of the scale of the challenge. And to articulate it, it's just under 5 billion litres of water per day as a deficit by 2050. And climate change has a key role in this. Specifically, there's a direct impact from climate change on our water supplies forecast, and that's amounting to just over 640 megalitres per day, million litres per day. But climate also has an impact on the big green bar in the top chart there. So our environmental destination, the abstraction reductions required to protect the environment. And that's because, our future flows are going to be impacted by climate change, and to maintain sustainable levels of abstraction, that further reductions are going to be required. And finally, the water industry's been set a challenge to improve drought resilience, so to be resilient to 1 in 500 year drought events by 2040. And of course, a drought event by 2040 will again be impacted by climate change as to the severity of that and the scale of that challenge. If we look at this problem kind of slightly below national level, it's important to understand the impact on climate change and other factors driving our deficit do vary across regions. So the southeast faces the biggest water resources challenge, but actually the north as a region faces the biggest proportionate impact from climate change as a proportion of their total resources challenge. And you'll see the north, the west, and the west country face a slightly greater share of kind of climate change, direct climate change impact than the southeast and east, perhaps reflecting the greater role of surface water supplies in their system, which we'll come on to in a bit more detail. And now I'm going to pass over to my colleague Mark, who's going to bring us into more detail on changes to water resources and groundwater. So over to Mark.
Thanks, Aiken. So how is climate change expected to change water resources? Well, fortunately, we've got the recently published CS Now publication, which was commissioned by UK government and DESNZ, and it used 3 different warming points and 3 different artificial influence scenarios with the EFLAG climate change data to look at what would happen to water resources and drought indicators. And it did find that the climate signal was stronger than the difference between the artificial influence scenarios, so that there was a decrease in annual mean flows for most southern catchments, There are also some seasonal variations in monthly flows with a median decrease of 33% during the summer months, so quite big decreases. And clearly some regional variations, so the southeast was very much the most affected by these changes. So lots more detail in the reports, but there are lots of unknowns and uncertainties. The issues of sea level rise and saline intrusion, for instance, the impacts of climate change on water demand, which needs some more research, and also issues like groundwater flooding, where we haven't yet got a clear idea of how that's going to change with climate change. So if we could go on to the next slide, please, Aiken. So why should we be worried about climate change and groundwater? Well, first of all, groundwater is really important for water supply. So it's a really important source of public water supply, as well as contributing base flow to rivers, lakes, and other dependent ecosystems such as wetlands. Secondly, we need to be making quite big sustainability reductions in abstractions. By 2050, the current Water Source National Framework shows that we might need to reduce abstraction by between 1,200 and 2,200 megalitres a day. And that includes sensitive habitats like chalk streams fed by groundwater that will be affected, that will benefit from those abstraction reductions. So obviously groundwater is a really important component of flow into those chalk streams. And thirdly, looking at recharge to groundwater, water balance calculations show that over the 2050s and 2080s period, the climate signal really predominates over the annual variability. And what we're seeing is a pattern of more recharge being concentrated in a fewer months. So the publication that sort of links to that is sort of listed down at the bottom there. But if we go on to the next slide, I'll just go into that in a little bit more. So we had a study done that the Environment Agency, my colleague David Second, commissioned back in 2018, 2019 to look at UK CP18 with the national scale recharge model that BGS have, Zudrum model. And it did find that the overall long-term average recharge remains similar, but the recharge is concentrated into fewer months. And that does tend to challenge the adequacy of a long-term average approach to water source planning. We clearly need to be looking at the drought indicators and seasonal and short duration rainfall to really make sense of how vulnerable our water source systems are and recharges to drought. Fortunately, we've got some good products to do that, with the flag outputs being available with distributed recharge grids, and also the recharge modelling from BGS. And we've also tried to ground truth this at a local scale with the Environment Agency's regulatory groundwater models. So you can see at the bottom there the little traffic light plot where we've looked at reductions in Q95 low flows with climate change. This example's from the Otter model in the southwest in sandstone. And we can see in the 12 VFLAG regional climate models, the number of those that are showing reduced flows obviously does increase as we go into the 2050s, 2080s, and that's a widespread finding from our groundwater models, which tends to give us a bit more local detail about what those climate change impacts may look like. So if we go on to the next slide, please, Aiken. So future challenges for groundwater resources. Again, using the EFLAG data, Simon Parry and others looked at the differences between surface water impacts and groundwater impacts, and they found that using a network of 51 groundwater monitoring sites, which you can see in the figure on the right, groundwater levels are likely to be more robust to climate change than the river flows. So the divergence in those projections of drought between the river flows and groundwater levels does bring into question the balance between surface and groundwater resources. So I guess that's something that we need to bear in mind if we're planning sustainability reductions of abstractions. And Rob Soley's CIWEM article from 2023 really expands on that and questions whether we should be throwing away the storage in the aquifers, which is obviously going to be critical to getting us through future droughts. So clearly we need more work on this. There's those issues of saline intrusion, groundwater flooding. We've had a first look at sewer leakage in the UK and what happens with climate change. And also I've been working on nature-based solutions and climate change as well, and how much they can contribute. So all of those things do need a bit more work. So I'll just hand over to you, Aiken, to do our last slide, if that's okay.
Yeah, so just to bring this to a close, really, I think, clearly the scale of the challenges are immense, and there's things we do know and there's things we don't. How are we responding to that at the Environment Agency? Well, firstly, we have that really important role that we obviously will continue to do in terms of water rights allocation and ensuring that there is sustainability in a catchment scale. And there's all sorts of work now to be looking at, those catchments holistically and understand the different water use activities. We're also, as I mentioned earlier, updating our national framework for water resources and continuing to promote and push for regional water sources planning to be happening across England. So you should look out for the updated national framework later this year. We have an important role with statutory water resources plans, so water resources management plans and drought plans, where we set kind of the guidance and expectations to help ensure that those plans use robust frameworks for planning for climate change. We continue to work with the industry in developing guidance, particularly for the next round of water resource management plans in 2029. And Mark already noted the importance of nature-based solutions. So yeah, we're doing a lot of work to support nature-based solutions and see greater uptake of them, appreciating they're a key part of a solution, but need to not be done in isolation, need to be done in, again, in that catchment kind of context. And finally, we're seeing, you might be surprised, but seeing companies move towards water supply schemes like desalination, water recycling. So we're supporting that move to incorporate less climate dependent supply options into public water supplies so that there is greater resilience. Thank you very much for your time, and please put comments in the Q&A. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, both. So I'm now going to introduce our next speaker, Miranda Foster, and she's going to share her screen while I'm doing that. So, okay, so welcome, Miranda. Miranda is a water resources modeller and hydrologist with over 25 years experience. Miranda recently returned to JBA after 22 years at Yorkshire Water, where she was a senior hydrologist responsible for providing specialist technical support throughout the business through water resource project management, hydrology, operational policy planning and guidance, and strategic planning for surface water assets. She has extensive experience of water resources planning and drought planning processes, having been responsible for the water resources supply parts of the water resources management plan, regional plan, and drought plan for Yorkshire Water. She has specialist experience in modelling the effects of climate change and water resources, including use of UK Climate Projection 18 projections. Okay, over to you, Miranda, and thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so hi, yes, I'm Miranda Foster, and I'll be talking about, as Hannah said, water resources planning. So in Yorkshire, these examples are from Yorkshire, but just an introduction, I guess, to the issue. So as Aiken has explained, water companies have got to produce water resources management plans. This includes a water supply forecast, a demand forecast, and allowances for outage and uncertainty. And these are used to calculate a supply-demand balance and plan for any investments needed to fill a deficit. All of these are affected by climate change, but I will just be concentrating on the water supply sides. So this presentation describes how climate change is accounted for in supply forecasts for a water resources management plan. So first of all, what is the water supply forecast? So you might hear the term DO, deployable output. It's a supply forecast for a water resources zone. So companies are made up of a number of water resources zones. And the deployable output represents the maximum amount of water that can be supplied in a water resources zone under a defined level of service scenario. So these levels of service can be things like temporary use bans and hosepipe bans, and also level 4 restrictions. For Water Resources Management Plan 24, the DO is defined as not having to implement level 4 restrictions, which are things like standpipes and rotor cuts, so really quite severe restrictions, more often than 1 in 500 years. And this deployable output is modelled using water resources simulation models. So these are models, they're simulation models that have got the sources, system constraints, demand centres, so everything, all the major constraints of a system. Reservoir inflows, river flows, and groundwater recharge could all be modelled, and then these are used as input to your simulation models. For Water Resources Management Plan 24, stochastic inflows have been used. This is because of the move to having to look at a 1 in 500 year level of resilience. You needed many more times than that data to more accurately estimate the 1 in 500 year event. So most companies have used the same sort of basic stochastic data sets, which consisted of 19,200 years or 400 sequences, each of 48 years of stochastically generated rainfall and potential evapotranspiration. And then the simulation, water company simulation models are run to calculate the deployable output. And you need to do quite a few model runs to find that point of failure, so that you can define when that 1 in 500 year metric is met. So that's all done for the baseline of the Water Resources Management Plan. And then we have to also do it for climate change, to look at the impacts of climate change. So yeah, for the impacts of climate change, you have to run your simulation models with new inflows that represent the inflows that you'd have in a future climate. And we've got a choice of what products to use. From UK CP18, there's 3,000 probabilistic projections, each at different for different emission scenarios or concentration pathways. And there's also the 12 regional models. There are others as well. There's global models too. Or there are things like the eFlag data, which gives you transient time series. So rather than the other ones, which give you a different information for the 2050s or the 2070s, eFlag gives you a gradually changing series over the period. So yeah, for the UK probabilistic, there are, I think, actually 3,000 projections for UK CP18 at different time slices for different emission scenarios. UK CP18, the regional models, there are only 12 scenarios, but it's available, and it's available only at the high emissions scenario for RCP, representative concentration pathway 8.5, and they tend to be hotter and drier. Just an illustration of this. This is showing summer rainfall and summer temperature changes. For the grey dots show the 3,000 probabilistic scenarios. These are all for the RCP 8.5, so a high emission scenario. And the orange dots show the same information for the 12 regional scenarios. And it's these 12 regional scenarios that have been used by most water companies. And they've been chosen because the regional scenarios are spatially coherent. And in this, as we move to the more regional planning that Aiken mentioned, it's really important to have data sets that match. And so these have been used, but quite often they've been scaled. So different water companies decide on what they want to plan for and level risk, and they've been scaled to represent these probabilistic. But as you can see, there is a huge amount of uncertainty as to what a future climate might look like. So yeah, just sort of taking you step by step through the process, but at a high level. From those scenarios, we can then, or for any given scenario, you'll have changes in rainfall and changes in potential evapotranspiration, which has been worked out from changes in temperature. And these are some examples of some catchments with showing the monthly profile. So in general, you know, as often the message is for climate change, you have warmer, wetter winters and hotter, drier summers. And you can see that, you know, some of the summer rainfalls are up to, you know, 50% of, almost 40% of current, and the potential of evapotranspiration is generally higher, all well above 1. And obviously in the winters, often quite a lot wetter in the winter months. So climate change, as we've said, warmer, wetter winters, hotter, drier summers. So these factors are applied to the stochastic data series, so all 19,000 years. So applied to the rainfall and the temperature. So we did this for all the 12 regional projections and a sample of the 20 probabilistic projections out of those 3,000. So altogether, this was 32 climate change scenarios, each with 19,200 years of data. So an awful lot of extra modelling compared to the previous, just using historic data where we had about 100 years of data. So the simulations run using the stochastic time series to calculate the deployable output for climate change scenarios. And it's done for a number of scenarios, and then the results are scaled. So this is just an example for one resource zone, showing the return period of level 4 restrictions for the different climate change scenarios, just for a model run at a given one given demand. And so that ranged from, for the wettest scenario, it's at 1 in 300 years. For the driest, those level 4 restrictions were met at about every 25 years. So for your water resources plan, you want sort of like pick the median to look at what you think the impact of climate change is, and then a wet and a dry to look at to cover the uncertainty. But as you can see, there is a huge level of uncertainty there. So then picked the median and then ran this at several demands to find the point when that median gave you your 1 in 500 level of resilience. Here are sort of some more results showing, here we've got a zonal demand and then return period. The blue lines, or the coloured lines, are for the 12 regional projections. The red is the median one, so the one that's used in the water resources zone planning tables, and the grey lines represent some of the 20 samples of the probabilistic scenarios. So you can see that again, the regional projections are at the sort of drier side, but there are still some of the others that give you a lower result. And those did look, you know, very different. But when these are scaled to, so yeah, one of the project that developed, that Atkins did, that developed the probabilist, the stochastic data, also developed scaling factors both between climate change scenarios and in time. And when those scaling factors were applied, it gave actually not that much difference between the results. So this shows that how the deployable output of the zone changes in time from the sort of no climate change situation to future climate, using the probabilistic scenarios or using the regional projections. So despite the fact that those look very different when they were scaled to represent the probabilistic RCP6, so a more median emission scenario, the results were actually quite similar. In conclusion, climate change will impact the amount of water available for public water supply. We know that it will have an impact. And although we've got these really sophisticated technical methods of working out what that impact is, we pretty much know that that will not be the impact, but it's, you know, using the best methods, these are our estimates. And it won't occur in a lovely sort of not linear, a beautiful curve like that. It's going to happen so it won't happen uniformly over time. It's likely to really just be shown in an increased frequency of droughts and also high flow events, which, you know, but that's what's going to impact your water resources. And we apply climate factors, you know, we apply this factor and apply it to every year of record. And really what's going to happen is that we're going to have some wet years, some dry years, some very dry years, but we're not at the stage yet where we can look at or really estimate well how the frequency of droughts is going to occur. So there is a lot of uncertainty, but it's still important to account for the impacts of climate change. And just to say that the choice of climate change model is often influenced by the available data sets. And for this round of planning, the fact that, you know, spatial coherence was really quite important as we move towards regional planning and wanting something that makes sense to use when looking at not just at one water company level. That's all for me. So any questions in the Q&A?
Thank you very much, Miranda. Okay, so we will move on to Rob Lawson, who I will now introduce. So welcome, Rob. Rob Lawson is a director of Artesia and the current chair of CIWEM's Water Resources Technical Panel. Rob has over 30 years' experience in water resources and hydrology, and his current technical work focuses mainly on the demand for water from customers, how this can be managed, reduced, and predicted. So over to you, Rob.
Very much, Hannah. Hopefully you can all see my screen and hear me well. Thanks for the opportunity to present today. What I'm going to talk about is a study that Artesia completed back in 2023. And it was focused on the 2022 drought, and we'll talk about that in a little while. And I just wanted to start with, get my controls right. Just a bit of an introduction. Obviously, many of you on the call will know that droughts are natural events, but as Miranda and Aitken and Co and Mark were also presenting, they are affected by anthropogenic climate change. And they can affect the environment in many ways. They can affect the environment itself, agriculture and water supplies. This presentation in this project is focused on the water supply aspects. And as well as the water resource plans that Miranda was talking about, water companies also must produce drought plans, those companies in England and Wales, to maintain water supplies and protect the environment. The drought plans will state how water companies will save water, increase supplies, monitor and mitigate the environmental effects, and ensure legal compliance. And this brief talk will present analysis of the drought conditions in 2022 and the impact of the measures that were taken by water companies as part of their drought management plans. And I'll conclude with some personal thoughts on resilience to drought, as climate change makes those impacts greater over time on this natural phenomenon. And yeah, just to emphasize that this work was based around a project that Artesia completed for Acquia. It was developed with in conjunction with the support of the Acquia panel, and the reference and location of that report can be found at that link, which I think Barbara will share on the chat. All of the references to individual papers that are included in this presentation are in that report as well. So just a little bit of context, another sort of plot of rainfall and temperature, a bit like the ones that Miranda was sharing. This is actual data and many fewer data points just from recent years. And it shows that July and August 2022 was the joint hottest ever recorded in England in a series from 1884. And it was the driest summer on record since 1995. And the sixth driest ever recorded in England, again from a series going back to 1836. And just for Wales, to give that geographical coverage, it was the third driest ever March to August period in Wales since 1865. Additionally, 4 of the 5 warmest summers on record for England have occurred since 2003. And really notable thing about 2022 was the peaks in temperature which were above 40 degrees centigrade for the first time ever recorded in this country, and Met Office analysis showed that that would have been virtually impossible without the effects of climate change driving those temperatures up through various meteorological interactions. And some attribution studies have shown that climate change made the heat wave 4 degrees centigrade hotter, and at least 10 times more likely than it would have been without that anthropogenic influence. So clearly we're getting more droughts and more severe drought events as a result of climate change. And so there are some important lessons to be learned from 2022. One of the things that we plotted in this study was just cumulative rainfall, which is actually quite an interesting analysis. So I've just highlighted some of the notable drought years there. I've blown up that image a bit, so it's a bit grainy, but hopefully you can see the key information there that up to the end of September, 2022 was the driest notable drought since 1976. Particularly in this area here, during July and August, cumulative rainfall was only surpassed in terms of how little rainfall there was in 76. And you can see quite remarkable 76 when you look at it, how flat those periods are there with almost no rainfall whatsoever. And the other interesting thing was early 2022 was relatively dry, particularly compared to 2018 and 2020. So again, this red plot here is fairly low down, and I'll actually go on to the next slide, which is a good comparison of cumulative rain for 2018 and 2022, and the magnitude of 2022 is definitely greater. You can see that clearly there in terms of the deficit compared to the historic average. But the real noticeable thing there was the antecedent conditions prior to the summer of 2022. There wasn't any surplus. It was all deficit. In contrast, 2018 there was quite a lot of surplus in that early part of 2018, as shown by the blue. And as we know, there was no water supply drought in 2018, despite some quite prolonged and severe drought conditions, whereas there was a supply drought in 2022. So that all kind of makes sense, but then we did some analysis at a spatial scale, and this is based on some of the modelling that we did, which I'll explain in a moment or two. But basically, you've got 2018 in the top row and 2022 in the bottom row of maps there of England and Wales. And if you just concentrate on the right-hand column, which is the summer column, you can see visually, without really looking in any detail, that 2018, that this is comparing how much water was put into supply, distribution input. You can see that there was a positive difference in the amount of water that was put into supply compared to the average, and that was bigger in 2018 than it was in 2022. So despite those sort of favourable antecedent conditions that we saw in the last slide, there was more total demand in 2018 than there was in 2022 in that summer period. And so that weather response was stronger in the year when we didn't have restrictions. But restrictions we did have. So this is a quick summary of the companies, the affected areas, and the periods when the temporary use bans were in place. For the most part, they started in mid to late August of 2022, and most of them ended by the autumn to winter period of 22. The one notable exception to that was the temporary use ban in the Cornwall and Upper Tamar region of South West Water, which continued well into 2023 and wasn't actually lifted until the autumn of 2023. Those are the regions where the temporary use bans, which is the new name for hosepipe bans, were enforced. And as part of the project, we agreed with the participants that we wouldn't kind of attribute company names to the results. So we've got companies A to F there, and as a way of anonymizing them. And it shows the average estimated impact in percentage terms of the temporary use restrictions. So just a little bit more on the modelling. Demand data, we normalised it, first of all, so that we could compare large companies with small companies. And then we applied analysis that removed trend and seasonal patterns from the demand as well. That gave us effectively a remainder. And then we tested several models, landing up on multiple regression models, and then looked at various model variables, including temperature, rainfall, other factors as well related to obviously the presence, absence of restrictions and so on. And then we compared modelled with actual demand and arrived at residuals, which show the difference between modelled and actual. And quite broadly across most companies, there was a negative residual during the periods of restriction, regardless of whether the company had a restriction in force or not, which showed that something was happening anyway. But when we concentrated on these particular companies, we could see that there were a better and a good response compared to other companies in terms of those percentages that are presented there. So on average, looking at the total amount of water put into supply, the reduction was about 3.3%, with a moderately large standard deviation around that, so quite a lot of uncertainty. Really looked up till the 11th of September when it was really noticeable from the weather analysis that the weather broke effectively, and the effect of tubs was going to be diminished anyway. So that was looking at it at a water company level. We also did some analysis at household level, and I won't go into this too much in the interest of time, but it was generally inconclusive due to a number of kind of data issues, really. But we did do some case studies and got some interesting results from those. It was a much more limited data set, but it did show that the effect of temporary use bans on household consumption was around 6.6%, so about double the effect that you could see at the company level. And that makes sense. Household consumption will be bigger than the savings in total water supplied, because the temporary use bans that were in force won't have affected the other aspects of the water that's put into supply by companies, which is in that previous figure, which includes leakage and demand from non-households, so businesses and commercial premises. So that's just a really quick run through. I'm going to finish off just with some personal thoughts. Those savings are relatively low. In the study, we compared them with the figures that water companies use in their drought plans and have been created from previous analysis. So around 6% at a household level is low compared to the sort of 10-ish% that most companies and some previous studies have reported. We weren't able to quantify the savings from communication campaigns. There was a lot of good data, but it was difficult to corral into a way that could be analysed in an effective way. So there was some observable reductions due to communications campaigns, but there was more to be done there to actually quantify that. The low savings from the temporary use bans could be due to the timing. So a lot of as you saw earlier, the temporary use bans weren't in place until mid to late August. And so for me, there's a clear question about why they were implemented so late. And part of that, I think, is around the negative connotations that they have. Companies are reluctant to impose them because they recognise that it's going to attract potentially negative press. But they are actually a reasonable and legitimate drought management measure. And I think that message needs to be got across much more strongly. As I said at the start, I think we will see more of those near 40-degree type temperatures going forwards, and that kind of changes the approach to managing supplies during drought. So typically in the past, drought plans are based on triggers in the environment, so reservoir levels or groundwater levels. I think more and more we need to take account of demand and temperature-driven demand, and more agile responses generally as well. One of the key complaints from companies in the last drought in 22 was that the legislative process is just a bit too slow to enable them to react that quickly. And that legislation definitely does need updating. And to help with all of that, we need more always-on communication about water supply risks. So reducing demand generally, and also saving more water when it's scarce. And that really needs to take into account not just the kind of hydrologically minded and water resource minded amongst us, but really needs to exploit some of the knowledge and skills that exist in the behavioural science and social science field about how we tackle that. And so the Ofwat's Water Efficiency Fund is a really important piece of that jigsaw. Thank you for listening. Hope I brought us back to time, more or less, and time for some questions. And I'm keen to answer any that you've got going forward.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of the speakers. I hope everyone's found that as interesting as I have, and being able to follow it through from the very high level strategic national picture through the science that goes into informing water companies' responses to drought and how they're planning for that, to that real life example from 2022. And we were saying yesterday on the test call that, which of us thought we were going to see 40 degrees summer temperatures. I didn't ever think I'd see those, and I saw it 2 days in a row. Right, so if I can ask all the speakers to put their cameras on, please. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions. So I'm going to hand over to Peter Rook to chair the question session. Peter is our CIWEM Early Careers President. So over to you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah, and some really interesting talks there. I've got quite a few questions in the Q&A, so I'm just going to start with the first one. So I think this is more directed towards Aiken, Mark, and Miranda, but it's what should be the primary focus in managing increasing water demand and scarcity in the UK, considering the impacts of climate change, and what are your thoughts on the development of large reservoirs to help contribute to this strategy? Aiken? Oh, sorry, Miranda, actually.
He wants to go
Okay.
first. You go, Miranda, if you want.
Okay. I think it's a difficult one to answer, but to say that the way that many companies model in the work that I presented, the way that many companies model their failure at 1 in 500 year level, so what would implement these level 4 restrictions, are reservoir stocks, and so it has to be something that could be resilient to not hitting those triggers. And that's what I think that's why reservoirs are coming out as a good answer, because rivers and groundwater at that stage are often haven't got any water left. So by using that measure, I think that reservoirs are often a really good source. Whether it's the right one, who knows? But I think that's partly what can drive the need for reservoirs.
Thanks, Miranda, and definitely some interesting thoughts there. Aiken, do you have more of an EA perspective on that?
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good question. I think the first answer is I don't think there's a single focus. I think there's multiple key focuses. And yeah, you'll see in some of our external documents, we really believe a twin track approach is required of reducing water demand, including leakage. Water companies have a key role to reduce leakage, but also demand in our homes and businesses, being more water efficient, making the most of the water we have. But also then, of course, taking actions to deliver new supplies. The thing to factor in is actually, introduce or building a new reservoir, which definitely some new reservoirs will be key to our future water security. But it takes time. It takes, often will take a decade or more. And we are going to need to take action, and particularly in the water demand space, sooner than that. So, people may be aware with the Ofwat's final determination, really significant amount of investment in smart meters to help everyone understand how much water is being used and where the opportunities are to be more water efficient, to stop the little leak trickling down your toilet pan or whatever it might be. So there's a huge amount that can be done. It does require focus, but not just on one area, on multiple, and across and of course across the water industry, government, and society, businesses, and so on.
Great, thanks, Aiken. So I suppose on that topic of sort of water efficiency, I've got another question which says, would smart meters help in better knowledge about use and savings? Could something like the demand flexibility service run by NESO work within the water world? I'm not sure, Rob, is that maybe more directed towards you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Peter. Definitely. The information and data that comes from smart meters is delivering a step change in our understanding of water use. We completed a collaborative study last year looking at shock events on PCC, which included what I've just talked about, but also the impact of the COVID lockdowns, post-COVID life for us all, working patterns, working from home more, as well as the cost of living crisis. And that used smart meter data to undertake that analysis. So being able to understand how different interventions affect consumption is critical going forward. It's something that I think is really important part of the Water Efficiency Fund and the lab within that. And we're working with a number of collaborators in the industry and outside to take that forward through a water demand observatory, which will use smart meter data, but also lots of other data sources from other places to understand water demand better and be able to attribute savings to all of these different things that are taking place now and in the future.
Thanks, Rob. And another very site-specific question here, but how can we encourage developers to focus on reuse of water at site level? For example, grey water for flushing toilets. Surely capture at source is better for the environment and manages water scarcity by keeping clean fresh water for drinking, etc. Solar photovoltaic is becoming more commonplace, so why not capture water as well as energy? So a bit of an open question. I'm not sure who wants to take that first.
Go first if you want.
Sure.
So yeah, I think that's a really important thing. And we all start off with that question about why do we use all this highly treated potable water to flush our loos when we could be using rainwater, or we could be using water from our baths or showers or whatever to do that. I think there's a lot of issues to address, but ultimately it comes down to some political will and some implementation of regulations and or incentives to enable that to happen. The technology is largely there; it's been proven to work, but the infrastructure that we have at the moment means that there needs to be some impetus, some catalyst to actually make that happen, as it has with things like solar. And there's several houses on my estate getting panels put on at the moment. I don't know if there's a deadline approaching around the subsidies for that, but everyone seems to be putting up panels at the moment.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Rob. Aiken, did you have some thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. So firstly, there's actually some really good work going on now on this. Water companies have quite a lot of incentives with developers to basically say, we'll reduce the connection charge if you go more water efficient and adopt some of these kind of rainwater harvesting or technologies, things like that. But that could be, that could become bigger and more widespread across new developments. Clearly, the government has an important role in thinking about the current building regulations and the water efficiency standards in that, and whether that can help drive some better practices around some of this. But also, I think it's important to think about this in terms of that there's probably different levels of technology and complexity and cost to this. Anyone could probably just, we could have a whole load of campaigns about getting water butts, and that's rainwater harvesting in a very simple sense. And a lot of our water use is outside, particularly those hot, dry weather conditions that Rob's outlined. So, yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities. Probably agree with a lot of what Rob said. Is it does need some more focus, but yeah, there's also some good news going on at the moment in this space as well.
Yeah, definitely. And at least in the southeast of England, I know water companies have run water butt kind of campaigns. Probably have time for one more question, so not sure who wants to take this, but it is, how much onus on the homeowner will be placed with regards to reducing water consumption and finding adaptive strategies to help themselves in their homes?
Go again if you want.
Sure.
I'll be brief to give other people a chance. I think ultimately it's people who use water, so there will be a focus on that, but it needs to be done in an appropriate way. So I think lots of good work has been done and is being done by the water industry, and we continue to support that. I think the big thing is that last point I made about the behavioural and social science. A lot of the water use we have is quite habitual, almost unconscious or non-conscious at times, about how we behave when we're filling the kettle or running the bath or having a shower, and it's all very personal and very private, so it's difficult for us to understand what is normal. So I think there needs to be a much bigger openness and research into it, but from that social science perspective, so that we can change social norms and not just lecture people about using less water, because that will definitely not work, in my opinion.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. I think just maybe, Aiken.
Yeah, I was going to be really quick. I think part of this is, water companies also need to play their key role in reducing leakage and enabling customers, empowering customers to make the right, water smart decisions. But also there's things we can do, particularly in the internal, like plumbing leakage space, where without making any behavioral changes, it's just a lot of homes, unfortunately, and businesses have water trickling down the drain at 3 a.m. in the morning, which doesn't need to happen and could be fixed pretty quickly.
Great, thanks for that. Well, I think that's all we have time for in terms of Q&A. So I'll hand back to Hannah to sort of close this out.
Thank you very much. So if you go on to the next slide, Duncan. So that's the conclusion of webinar number 3. It's not over yet though. You can join us this time next week for more. Webinar number 4 on water quality, where we will be looking at the impacts of our changing climate on the physical, chemical and biological quality of our freshwater environments. Speakers include Murray Dale from JBA, Elliot Gill and Tim Darlow from Stantec, and Richard Pickering from Binnies. And there's a QR code there, so if you've got your phone within reach, before you get your lunch, scan the code and sign up for next week. That's my advice. And then we'll just quickly introduce forthcoming events. So a couple of forthcoming CIWEM things you may also wish to consider. 6th of March, a joint presidential event, this time with the Association of Directors for Environment Planning and Transportation, local government membership organisation on placemaking. Free webinar. Again, maybe sign up to that one after you signed up to next week's one with the BHS. The day after that is CIWEM's Rivers and Coastal Group Technical Conference in London. That's in person. There's also an in-person event coming up, that is CIWEM Presidential Conference with the East and West Midlands branches in Coventry in April. And that should launch at the end of this week, beginning of next week for bookings. And then just to highlight, early June, first week of June, the National Flood and Coast Conference. Duncan, it looks like you've resolved the sound issue. So do you want
I'll give it a go.
Okay.
Yeah, I may be crackly, but yeah. So a few forthcoming events for BHS. We've just set a date for this next one, 21st of May in London. We've got a one-day conference on flash flooding, joint with the Royal Meteorological Society. So look at our website soon for information about how to book. And then there's a few others listed here. You can see we have an early career 2-day conference coming up at Liverpool in July. Looking ahead to December, we have another one-day in-person meeting in London about international hydrology. And we also have regular regional meetings, so look out for local groups. I don't have any dates to share at the moment, but that's a really good way to get together with other people interested in hydrology. I think that's it from BHS.
Good. Thank you very much, Duncan. So we'll draw it to a close there. So thank you very much once again to our speakers, and thank you to everyone that's attended the webinar today. And I hope you have a lovely Wednesday afternoon. Bye-bye.